Okay, Gavaldik, good morning to everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. V'siyata l'shmaya, and gratefully, today's shir is graciously sponsored by Bernard Bolag, L'ilui Nishmas, his mother, Sarah Deborah Jacobi bas Yehושוע, and L'ilui Nishmas Miriam bas Yehושוע, and Yehושוע ben Abraham Yehuda, and neshama shel Haman Aliyah, as well as Mrs. Deborah Jacobi, in honor of her beloved father Aryeh Leib and Shlomo, blessed memory, the neshama shel Haman Aliyah. We're very grateful for the sponsorship and the dedication, and our learning should be an Aliyah for the neshama b'siyata d'shmaya. So we jump back into Torah Yutes, which we began yesterday, a very terse and enigmatic teaching where there's a tremendous amount of information in mamish every line, every half a line. And so we spent quite a lot of time in the beginning of the Torah yesterday just getting into the sugya of ultimately trying to understand, in a more general sense, the distinction between learning the Torah of a tzaddik out of a sefer and then actually being in the presence of the tzaddik to be mekabel from the tzaddik himself. That's the general topic that we're going to be discussing, all in the context of the line at the very beginning of Sefer Tzniusa, which the next 4 lessons, like we said yesterday, are going to be explaining the 5 chapters of Sefer Tzniusa, which says that until there was maskala, which we spoke quite a bit about yesterday, until there was the balanced experience of chesed, gevura, and then tiferes, netzach, and then yisoid, well, you have a mashgich and apen ba'apen. There's no integration. There's no interaction face-to-face. Everything is on its own. And the face-to-face experience of the spheres, recognizing that each and every one of them are only one data point in a larger algorithm, that produces the inyan of maskala, or that reflects the reality of maskala of the olam hatikun that takes place after the olam of shvir sakelim, right, where each of the energies is a shavur, so it's a piece that's broken off of the larger whole. So the tzaddik had taught us right in the beginning in Eis Beis that a person needs to really cleanse their face and reach such a level where even without articulating any kind of musar or any kind of really hadracha, just by being, someone who comes into contact with such a person is automatically changed. It's almost as if they see themselves reflected in a mirror, because in relative terms they recognize, where am I? Heichan ani ba'olam, like the viceroy says in the story of the lost princess. He wakes up and recognizes, where am I in the world? What am I doing in this world? Where am I? How am I using my time? Like we learned in an earlier lesson, right, about Shmiras Hazman and about Cheshbon HaNefesh, and without any teichacha, the Rebbe says, without any adasha b'loy teichacha b'loy musar, a person will yischar et chaver teikef l'maisav, and a person will want to be better. And each and every one of us can reach that level. The tzaddik certainly reaches that level, but you can begin to understand an inkling of why it might be very powerful to sit in the presence of such a person, not just to learn, static words out of a sefer, but where there's a whole other lived experience of the Kabbalah of Torah from the tzaddik himself in his presence. That's a whole different story. Okay, but we're going to get more deeply into that as well. And then really in Eis Gimel is where the sugya began to open up. And we spoke about the concept of Lashon HaKodesh. Lashon, Dibor, communicative vehicle that's communicating Kodesh, that's channeling down into our reality something transcendent, right? Lashon HaKodesh, as opposed to the Lashonos of the Umas HaOlam. And it isn't just about speaking, it isn't just about a language that one may choose to speak or not speak, but really it's a whole different lifestyle. Because ultimately we understand that if the world is created and each and every entity within the world, like we learned in Torah Yitzayin, maintains its structural integrity, and every single thing has its own Ratzon Hashem. Everything is communicating its own message, because each and everything has an edge, right? And so this water bottle is not the cup, and the cup is not the coffee cup, and the coffee cup is certainly not the sefer, and the sefer is not the table. The chulei, all of this is dibur. All of this is communication. There's information here that's being transmitted. And the question is, what kind of communication is it? Is it meaningless stuttering? Right? Is it just stam fragmented letters like we learned in the previous Torah? Letters that are missing a fundamental component of a portal to enable us to look to them and through them beyond, to recognize that we live in this world which is only a temporary reality that's enabling us to really access deeper and higher spiritual realms? Or is it a world that's mamish emerging from a Kadosh Baruch Hu's mouth? And we spoke about the breath And we spoke about the breath being channeled through the vocal cords, which is the bechina of Tiferes, of Hakol Kol Yaakov, the aspect of Kutchabrichu, and then ultimately the Dibor, right, of Malchus, of Chava, that's split off from Adam, which is the world as we experience it, to see that as a direct extension from Adam Rishon, as a direct extension into the bechina of Malchus, or the world of Asiya, or the aspect of David HaMelech, as it relates to Tefillah, as it relates to Torah, David HaMelech and Yaakov Avinu. And in this sense, once a person is able to access the world and a creation on the level of recognizing, going back to Torah Aleph, that it's a Malchus de Kedusha, not a Malchus de Sitra Achra, because it's going to be one or the other. Either, going back to the very, very beginning of the whole series, either we're looking at the world through Esav eyes, right, and we're seeing a world that's devoid of meaning, or we're seeing the world, through Yaakov Avinu eyes. And Yaakov Avinu eyes recognizes, just to use Torah Aleph terminology for a second, that the Nun of Olam Hazeh is reflective of the Ches, of Chachmi Ilah. That's the Bechina of Yaakov Avinu. Such a person will understand that the aspect of this world is Chava, who is a lashon of Dibor, Laila Laila Yechaveh Da'as. That's the bechina of speech. And we had the word Zos, that's in the reference to Isha, Zos, that's in the reference of Dibor. And that will ultimately enable a person who's connected to the worldview of a Jew, to the worldview of a Yaakov Avinu, about whom the pasuk says, "Kishazekam zeh noifal." When a person is connected to the bechina of Yaakov Avinu, to Lashon HaKodesh, where the speech is channeling something higher, so then what happens? Said Rashi about this, that Chava was taken from Adam, which is that our reality emerged from a transcendent reality of Adam Rishon. Lashon noifel al lashon. Ki l'zayis yikare isha, ki mi ishlu kachazayis lashon noifel al lashon, which means, the way that Rabbi Nachman understands it, is that when we are connected to Lashon HaKodesh, Lashon Neifel al Lashon. This is causing all of the other languages of the nations of the world, which is their perspective on all of reality, to Neifel, to fall down. And it's enabling us to mamish stand strong in who we are and with our worldview, to live in a world that's lichtig, to live in a world of Chachmas Adam Ta'ir Panav K'may HaShemesh, again going back to Torah Aleph, to live in a world Meir Lo Yaseichel HaChachma V'Seichel Sheish V'Chadav L'Skarav LaHashem Yisbarach Al Yidei Oisei HaDavar. When a person recognizes this world is a portal, this world is not a wall, this world is a door, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu is not hidden from this world, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is hidden inside of it, waiting for us to discover him. That's a little bit of what we discussed yesterday. Toward the end of the shir, and here we'll begin today, we started talking about the Ra HaKoilel. The Ra HaKoilel, said Rabbi Nachman, being Ta'ainu Taveras HaMedura Shal Tavas Niyuv, the aspect of adultery. And we spoke that in a very deep way, we know that the bris HaMa'ar, right, the bris of a person's actual body, is connected to another bris. The Sefer Yitzir tells us there are two brisin, bris HaMa'ar and bris HaLashon. Very, very deep. The bris HaMa'ar and the bris HaLashon. These two parts of the body are extraordinarily linked. Requires a little bit, maturity, which Baruch Hashem all of us have. There are two parts of the body that have hair growing around them. It's a very, very deep thing. Not stem. On the male body, right? There are two parts of the body. We're talking about the male body. The bris and the peh, both are accompanied by hair. Even in Sifrei Kabbalah, in Sifrei Pnimis, and the Zohar Kodesh, they're called, this part of the body Ilah and that part of the body Tata, because they are linked. They are inextricably linked, because all the spheres exist in the head, because the head is Atzilus, and Atzilus is the place where you have all of the spheres, right? So all of the senses, the eyes, the ears, the nose, the mouth, all of this is the 10 spheres already. As it's nishtalshal into the body, it unfolds in such a way. That means, without into the details of it, but very basically, the tongue is the bechina of the bris. The tongue is the bechina of the bris. The mouth is the bechina of malchus. That's zivuga b'tedira, right? The tongue is constantly in the mouth, you understand? The bris halashon is not stam as a bris halashon. It's literally a bris. It's literally the sphere of Yesod. The lips are netzach and hod. The mouth, the cavity of the mouth is malchus. This is the depth of the Arin, where the two kruvim are the bechina of netzach and hod, and out from the middle of the kruvim comes the dibor. That's why the Kodesh HaKodashim, the Beis HaMikdash more generally, is called Devir Kadshecha, because it's all about dibor. And the Kodesh Baruch Hu communicates through that place, which is the place of Yesod, and malchus that are emerging out of the bechina of netzach and hod, which are the lips, which in our own face becomes the mouth and the two lips and the tongue and the communication that we're producing. What kind of communication are we producing? Is it impotent? Is it a bechina of zera levatala, right, where it doesn't produce any fruits and it's stam meaningless chatter and it's stam lashon hara, it's stam mamzeris, you understand, it's stam, or is it something that mamish is in the right way, with the ish and the isha in such a context where they're going to be able to nurture that child and raise them to kedusha and tara and raise them as a koyma shlema. Niyuf is the hepech of lashon hakodesh. Understand? This is what we said yesterday, because the bechina of lashon hakodesh is that the lashon of the communication is transmitting something that is really valid with all of what it requires to be able to function properly. And that means that the dibur of the niyuf, right, is not channeling something of kodesh. Because the whole thing of niyuf is that a person is falling into the perceived illusion that there's nothing beyond that we're beholden to, that there are no objective strictures of the world of morality, and a person can act on whim. And a person can follow their own hyper-personal taiva, irrespective of anybody else, usually even the woman that he's with, right? And the objectification. Rabbi Yehuda said such a deep thing. You want to say what you say yesterday? Rabbi Yehuda said the deepest thing, that the whole inyan of the taiva of niyuf is the objectification of women. In this right, because we stop seeing them as people, and all of a sudden it becomes something, for a person's own pleasure, right? Which is it's so hyper aligned with a person's own ego, which is the opposite of the way that a person's supposed to be in this world, where a person's supposed to be other focused, a person's supposed to see and recognize and sense the higher kedusha and everything. So Yehuda said the deepest thing, because we're learning here in the context of this Torah that the ultimate isha is mamish this world, which is chava. And so the people that objectify women in the bechina of taivas niyuf are usually objectifying the woman of Mother Nature, if you will, the whole world. And they're only seeing the outside of it. We're not seeing malchus. We're not seeing HaKadosh Baruch Hu's malchus to kedusha. It's a very, very deep thing. Because it's a very, very shallow thing if a person lives, in the way of taivas niyuf. And all of us are on the journey, and all of us are working on this bechina, because it isn't mamish just adultery, and that's also an issue by many people today. Hashem Yishmar Aleinu, but it's all of the different bechinas that are related to this concept. So let's jump back in from there. Okay, that was basically a review from yesterday. I apologize for just getting back into the sukkah, because it's a very, very deep thing.
Which one? Malchus, Netzach, and what's
Malchus? The mouth itself, the cavity of the mouth.
Oh.
Yeah, that's what we said yesterday. The Malchus is a kli. It's the mouth is a vessel. Okay, v'hara hakoilel. Let's jump back inside. V'hara hakoilel. And the collective evil, shekol ha'ra'ay shel shivim lashon klulim b'ay, that literally all of the aspects of the nations of the world, with all of their languages and all of their way of experiencing the communication of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which is Olam Hazeh, are stuck in. V'anetav eres ha'medura shel taivas niyuf, which is the flickering, burning, flaming torch of taivas niyuf, of this desire, that all of the nations of the world are meshuka in this. So noifel v'nizbatel, it can be completely and entirely annulled, and it will have a downfall. Ve'en l'shlita, and will no longer be able to control a person al yidei lashon hakodesh, by virtue of a person working on their emunah, by working on this way of looking at the world, which again we mentioned in previous shiurim. Sometimes dealing with an issue is the issue, and sometimes the way to address an issue is b'chalal not linear. It's b'chalal not sort of dealing with this addiction, or that sometimes it's a more general shift, a more general lifestyle change. Doesn't necessarily have to do with working on this per se. It could be this inyan is a symptom of a much, much, much larger issue. If a person works on the larger issues, then bit by bit, it might be a slower process, bit by bit, a person sees that begins to fall away. This is the aspect of what's mentioned in the Zohar with regard to a medura, a torch that's composed of 70 stars. Shevim koichavim. And the Rebbe says this is reflective of the 70 nations of the world, and this is the torch. And it's a flame, it's a flickering flame, it's a taiva. Taiva is related to fire, the chamimus of the heart, leib ksilis smoiloi, right? It's the heat of the Yetzer Hara in a person's body. Hainu ara koilel. Says the Rebbe, this Zohar Kadosh, this torch composed of 70 stars, is the aspect of this Ra HaKoilel, this collective Ra. Which again is this flickering torch of this particular taiva for particularly sexual immorality. That there's not one nation of the world other than Klal Yisrael that strives for this, that really strives and really succeeds. It's unbelievable. People pay lip service, which of course is Pagama Bris, right? Because it's the opposite of lip. All the Christians, everybody pays lip service to chastity and to this and that. It's just not the Metzias. Because it's kakoif ne'adam. It really is. All the religions pay lip service, to this Indian dafka of morality. By Klal Yisrael, it's a real thing. The tzaddikim were mamish moral. Okay, we have stories like everybody has stories, but qualitatively and quantitatively, zelo, it's not the same. We are an Am Kadosh. Generally, we are really an Am Kadosh. We're really a people that strive and that hold this to be, a real ideal. It really is something so unique about us. We shouldn't be fooled by the like I said, the Zera Levatala, quote unquote, of all the diburim and the declarations and everything else of the Ummah Sa'ilam. I don't care what you say. I want to know how we live. And Klal Yisrael, Chazdei Hashem, I'm talking about specifically Torah or observant and oriented Jews are remarkably pure. Again, relative to what's going on in the world, remarkably kaddish v'tar. And whatever struggles that we have, whatever's going on is, adjusted in relative terms to the culture, we're doing great. We're mamish doing great. It's unbelievable. Because this is what the whole world is stuck in. So says the Rebbe, Chashmal. This is the inyan of Chashmal. Chashmal comes in the context of the vision of Yecheskel, who first sees the Shalish Klipas Hatmeis Legamri in the Lashon of the Tanya. First he sees three very tremendous and powerful aspects of Ra. He sees the Anan Gadol, he sees the Eish Mislakachas, right? And he sees what was the other one? The Ruach Sa'ara, right? He sees three very difficult sort of metaphors, natural metaphors for horribly, intense and terrible natural disasters, fire and wind and a big cloud. And then he sees what's called the Noiga, Misaviv, right? He sees a glow, and that's called the Klipas Noiga, which we're going to be learning a lot about, that the whole basically Sefer Tanya is built on. And then inside he sees what's called Chashmal. Chashmal is not a word that has a meaning. Today in modern Hebrew, Chashmal is electricity, but it doesn't really mean anything. Chashmal, what is this Chashmal? It's a total mystery, and it's a reference to Kedusha. Says the Gemara in Chagiga, Mazeh Chashmal. Chashmal is a conjugation of a number of words that are Chayos, Eish, Memalalos. These are Chayos, like angels, that are created out of fire, Memalalos, that are speaking. Or the other tzaddikim, not in this Gemara, but the Gemara says Chashmal, and this is much more enigmatic and very deep, is Chash means silence, and Mal means speech. It's the silent speech. Very, very deep and obviously mystical, in the context, and we have to think about that too. But in this context, Chayos Eish, says the Rebbe, is Bechinas Chava. Chayos Eish is Chava, because Chayos is the letters Chava, right? That's the Shirish, is Ches and Vav. Eish is Isha. Chavos Eish, says the Rebbe, is Chaya v'Isha. Chayos Eish, Bechinas Chava Isha, Hana Bechinas Lashon HaKodesh K'niska L'el. This is the aspect of Lashon HaKodesh, again, not just the language in and of itself, but the way that the language communicates a consciousness of the nation, the national consciousness. Shal Yodai Mismalel Umishtaber Eish HaMedur Shal Shavim Kechavim. He's learning Mismalel as a terminology of destruction. Mismalel Umishtaber. That through Chayos Eish, through a person who's connected to the Bechina of Lashon HaKodesh, Lashon Noifel Al Lashon. Through that, Mismalel, Mimalelos, Mismalel Mishtaber, Eish Medur Shel Shavim Kechavim, we're going to be able to overcome the flaming torch of the 70 stars. V'zeh Bechinas Mal. of chashmal. This is in the word chashmal that's represented by mem and lamed, right? Those become chayis ish mimalalois, right? So what's mem and lamed? Says the Rebbe, mem is 40, lamed is 30, together is 70. Shemechinas medura shel shavin kechavim. This is the 70 nations. That a chayis ish mimalalois, mal. It's the Shavin Koichavim, the 70 nations of the world. Shenismalal v'nisbatel al yedei lashon hakodesh. Lashon noifel al lashon. Ki al shem zeh nikra lashon hakodesh. That is why it's called lashon hakodesh. Ki kol makom shata moitze geder erva. There ata moitze kedusha. So lashon hakodesh, the very word kodesh in the terminology and the expression lashon hakodesh is already reflective of this. That lashon hakodesh is the counteraction for Taivas Niyov. Because the word Kodesh itself is already referencing a Geder Erva. Why? Because again, it's two completely different ways of looking at the world. Either, like Rabbi Yehuda, you unlock the whole Sugya Mamish, either you're objectifying the world, right? Which is the aspect of a Lashon that's not Kodesh, because it's not transmitting anything that's coming from a transcendent place, or we're engaging with the heart and soul of the world, and we're not trying to manipulate it, and we're not trying to use it for our own usage, and we see ourselves as on a mission serving a much larger purpose. In that sense, it's the opposite of Erva, and in that sense, it's Mamish Kedusha. That's Lashon HaKodesh. Beautiful. V'zeh shepirish Rashi. You see how every line he's not like he's super intensely over here. It might be one of the Torah's Gesundheit. We saw that's it's relentless sources, relentless information. It's unbelievable. It's mamish lashon hakodesh, and he's communicating things in every word. V'zeh shepirish Rashi, and that's pshat in Rashi. Al kein yazev ish es aviv es imai. Therefore, a person should leave his father and his mother. V'davak v'ishtai. Who is this in reference to? Adam and Chava, right? And Rashi says, "Mikan shenesol lehem arayos." From here, we see that arayos was aser because yidbak be'ishtai, and be'ishtai is chutz from all of the other people that are not his wife, right? And even if you think about it, kiddushin, which we've spoken about, is aser la al kula alma ke hekdesh. Over there also, hekdesh is used. It's a geder erva, right? Because over there, the kiddushin means that only, right? Aser lano as an asuis, as a, what's the lashon? Arusas, right? And hitr lano as an asuis, ayidei chuppah ve'kiddushin, right? So that's a geder erva, and everything else is not relevant. But it's learned out from Chava and Adam, that Adam and Chava should have this very particular relationship, that they shouldn't be turning to other places. Rashi says, Mikan shenem lehem arayos, and then Rashi throws in a whole different thing, Ruach HaKodesh Emeres Kain. And this is Ruach HaKodesh. Geder Erva, the Bechina of Asol Nestor Lehem Arayos, emerges from a place of Ruach HaKodesh. Maza Ruach HaKodesh, says the Rebbe, beautiful. Ruach HaKodesh is Lashon HaKodesh. That's a reference to Lashon HaKodesh. Kamay uv Ruach Piv, Kol Tzavam. HaKadosh Baruch Hu created everything with Ruach Piv. What's Ruach Piv? Ruach Piv is Lashon HaKodesh. Vayarma lekimihi ar. Like we said very deeply yesterday. I'm not sure if the Chavra really picked up. It's just a Rashi, but it changes the whole literal way that we read the opening passage of creation, where instead of it being, I'll just reiterate, Bereshis bara Elikim, where the whole center of gravity is on creation of the world, instead it isn't in the beginning God created. It is in the beginning of God's having created heaven and earth. And when all of that happened, right? And that is how the whole creation hinges upon the expressivity of HaKadosh Baruch Hu bringing light into the world by enabling us to engage with the world through the eyes of Yaakov Avinu that enable us to see all of the letters of the world, which means all of the experiences that we have as portals to the light, right? Opaque. Right, which is to be able to see the light and to remove the blockage and see the R, that everything is R. Rabbi Yehuda sent me also yesterday that somewhere in Switzerland, Australia, where they're developing. They figured out how to channel energy, because everyone's looking for sources of energy, right? Non-renewable resources, renewable. They found out a way how to turn light, just light, into energy. Just to channel light itself, mamish, like just the R. So it's an incredible thing, because the whole world is R. The whole reality is light. If you didn't have light, you couldn't see anything. If you didn't have light, it's space. There's no light. It's just darkness. There's nothing. The whole world is R. The whole world is energy. The whole world is light. And so, Ruach HaKodesh Omer Kain, says the Rebbe, is Ruach Piv Kol Tzavam. Is the creation of the world with this Ruach Piv, which is speech. So Ruach HaKodesh Omer Kain, which is the Bechin of Nes Alehem Arayis that emerged from Ruach HaKodesh, which is Lashon HaKodesh. Because it's through this that the 70 stars of the Bechin of Niyaf are proscribed and are prohibited. She'ein lo shlita al Yisrael al yidei lashon hakodesh, and ultimately have no power over us. But b'chinas lashon noifel al lashon kaniskele el sharuach shtus nisbatal al yidei ruach hakodesh. Because what's the essence of the Yetzer Hara for Taivas and Niyaf? And all of us have experienced this in one form or another. Is a ruach shtus. It's a very powerful ruach shtus. It's a ruach of ignorance. What does it mean? It means it causes a person to forget all of the things that if they were thinking with the rational brain, they understand that this is not what I want to do, this is not worth it, this is not going to make me happy, this is not in alignment with my values, this is not something I want to do, etc. And in a moment, the Ruach Shtus is so incredibly powerful and should be taken very seriously, even though in another sense it should be made a joke out of, which is a shmooze for a different time. But at least in its manifestation, on first glance, if a person isn't really rooted in Das, as we're going to learn later on in Likutei Moharan, it's a Ruach Shtus. It's a ruach of ignorance. It causes a person to forget. It's a ruach of shikha. It's the bechina of zachar es asher asalach, or zachar asher asalach amalek, right? Because the way that we counteract amalek, we're going to be learning about, which is the bechina of keri asher karcha b'derech, which is all about erva, which is all about pekama bris, is all about shikha. So the way to counteract that is by remembering zachar al tishkach, zachar, because the whole thing is the ruach shtus that comes to make a person forget all the things that in our right mind we have totally clear. There's a ruach shtus that enters a person, as the Gemara says, "Ein adam over avera ela in kain nichnas by ruach shtus." Says the Rebbe, how do you counteract the ruach shtus? With the ruach hakodesh, which is lashon hakodesh. So the ruach hakodesh of the ruach hakodesh nemar kain, oimeres kain, which said that mikan sheneslam arise in the context of Adam and Chava, that Chava should only have Adam, and ultimately Adam should only have Chava. Meaning that Adam, which is you and me, should only live in this world, which is Chava, with the eyes that are able to mamish be married to it, and not looking elsewhere, and not looking inward, but looking at the world and through the world, to be able to sense the Kedusha that the world intends to communicate. That Ruach HaKodesh, as a Ruach Piv called Tzivam, is going to counteract the Ruach of Shtus that causes the type of Fernia. V'zebechinas tikkun abris. And this is the aspect of the rectification of the covenant. Shu b'chinas ruach hakodesh. The mamish can bring a person to ruach hakodesh. It's the only way. But b'chinas v'lei kama oid ruach be'ish. The pasuk says in Yehושע, the Gemara Darshans over there, v'lei kama oid ruach be'ish. The people were so afraid they didn't have any energy left in them. What didn't they have energy for? The Gemara says they didn't have energy for tash v'shamita. And this is exactly the point. V'lei kama oid ruach be'ish, because it's all about the ruach, either ruach shtus, or if there's a holy ruach of Yerushalayim, so that brings a different aspect into the person. It's a ruach of Kedusha. And this is after Adam and Chava are split off from each other, because originally, according to the Medrash, they were du partsufin. They were looking in opposite directions, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu was mapel. The Gemara said, the Medrash says, Hashem put a tardema, right? HaKadosh Baruch Hu put a deep slumber, which we're going to be learning very deeply about it. We're just getting started. We're opening up a big, huge sugya now. It really is very long. It goes for a number of pages. So we're going to get into this, but Hashem puts a tardema on Adam, and he splits off Chava from Adam, right? That's how the whole process begins, without getting to the whole depth of it, but this is the sod of Rosh Hashanah, right? We've spoken about this, I think, Rosh Hashanah time. That's exactly what's happening when a Kadosh Baruch Hu's Malchus is being re-proclaimed in the world. Malchus is that Chava, which is the whole aspect of Malchus on all the levels, Malchuscha, Malchus, Kol Elamim, all of the Malchuyos, so to speak, of all the different Madrigas, and certainly our physical world, is split off, Kiviyachol, from Adam, where we get our Bechira, and we experience ourselves as individuated creatures who have our own autonomy and our own individual capacity for choice. This is all through HaKadosh Baruch Hu's Malchus, which we experience from our own perspective, because Ein Melech V'lei Am, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu needed a nation in order to make him into a Melech. That's the concept of the dynamic of the sphere of Malchus. Now, in order for an Am to accept a Melech, we've spoken about this also, what is necessary? Umalchusai be ratzon kibla aleim. They need to have the bechira to choose willfully their king. So there has to be in Malchus the bechina of autonomy. We rely on the Melech, but the Melech relies on us. And in order for the Melech to rely on us, we have to have our own autonomy to be able to choose and to accept the Malchus of the Melech upon us. That's what's going on in Malchus, that's what's going on in Rosh Hashanah. And the only way for that to happen is when Chava is split off of Adam and becomes her own identity. Meaning she is given, which is all of us, right, and our own consciousness here in the world of Chava, could say in the world of Malchus, are split off that enables us to be able to approach HaKadosh Baruch Hu with the experience of our own identity, which is a total pele. It's mamash the biggest pele of all the playim, of all of Kabbalah, is this, that we are literally sparks of the divine and we don't experience life that way. And that is the truth. And no matter how hard we try to sort of embody that and make choices out of that, that's not our experience. I have a name. I'm Yaakov Klein. I have a past. I have a present. I have a future. I have my life. I have my details, my circumstances. And be that as it may, I'm mamish, a part of God. All of us are literally chelik of the kamimal mamish. And that's the chiyas that's in my body, but I don't experience that way. None of us do. It's a pele. It's mamish, the whole thing is one huge achizas einayim. It's a total symptom is an illusion, but it's magicians never tell their secrets. It's a really, really, God is like the magician of all magicians. This is a side of all the sides. This is the bechina of getting into it. This is the bechina of the paraduma. Of Amarti Echgema, you're chayka mimeni, like Shlomo Melech says. This is the aspect of the sod of the paradox of Mataras Atmei, Mataras Tahira Immediate Tami Vitar. This is the paradox of the tzimtzum of this whole reality that we live in. It's a pele atzum. It's a total pele. It's incredible, but this is the way that it is. That's what happens on Rosh Hashanah. Chava is split off from Adam, meaning we get the perception of our own autonomous self, so that we can then, in the Bechina of Chava, turn back around to Adam and choose Adam. Umalchusa beratzen kiblu aleh. And then HaKadosh Baruch Hu becomes our Melech, and then we become his Am. But ultimately, after HaKadosh Baruch Hu split Chava off from Adam, the pasuk says, "Vayiskar basar tachtena." HaKadosh Baruch Hu then closed off the basar, closed off the skin out of which Chava emerged. Whether according to one narrative, it was a rib. According to the other narrative, again, it was mamish, the whole parts of Adam and Chava that were connected back to back, that she was completely cut off from him entirely. Says the Gemara in Brachos, what does this mean? Vayiskar basar tachtena. That the skin was then closed up afterwards. So it says because something had been cut off, and the thing that was cut off needed to be closed up. Says the Rebbe, you know where else we find the word chatach very often? With regard to speech. It's called chituch hadibor. Chituch hadibor means enunciation. Why is it called chituch? Because the letters should cut. Right? Sometimes you see people don't enunciate properly. There's no, you can't really hear them because they're not enunciating. Then the n should be n. It should be, and in singing, if anybody does singing lessons a little bit, they'll tell you, enunciation is a huge part of it. You should see, especially opera singers, you hear every syllable they pronounce. It's called chituch hadibor, because the letters are like cut off one from the other. Each and every letter is enunciated properly. Says the Rebbe, think of it so deeply. What did HaKadosh Baruch Hu cut off from Adam? Chava. What is Chava? Dibor. So as a result, there's a chituch. Sure, there's a chituch. It's chituch hadibor. Chava being cut off from Adam is a bechin of enunciation. You hear how deep this is? It's unbelievable. Says the Rebbe Shor. Hanu chituch hadibor. And what did HaKadosh Baruch Hu do then for Chava? I'm telling you, every line is like, what was done next for in the process of Adam and Chava? HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Vayiven esatzela. HaKadosh Baruch Hu built up that rib. Vayiven. Say Chazal, what does it mean? Vayiven, he built her up. Asa'a ka'oitzar. He built her up like an oitzar. What's an oitzar? An oitzar is a storage house for grain. That the Gemara says, HaKadosh Baruch Hu built her up like an oitzar, wide on the wide on the bottom half, and narrower on the up half, right? In order to be able to store the grain, just like an isha has a womb that she's able to hold the child inside. because ultimately the whole inyan of Lashon HaKodesh, which is the inyan of Tikkun HaBris, is reliant on one thing and one thing only, which is Yiras Shamayim, which we said in a previous year doesn't mean Chas v'Shalom to be afraid of Hashem, but it means to live in a state of awe, which is a result of the word Yira having the letters, as I believe the Shlomo Kadosh tells us, is the letters Re'iyah, which means that we live in a world where we see the world for what it is. Instead of objectifying it, we look beyond it. And instead of seeing everything as through the prism of the self, we see the self through the prism of everything else. And we see ourselves as being here on a mission to be able to give to others and not just simply to take for ourselves. And in that sense, we don't objectify other things. We actually engage with things in the deepest way so that we can be givers. And that's the ultimate reason that we're here in the first place. But it's all Talila and Yiras Hashem. What's Yiras Hashem? Says the pasuk in Yeshayahu, Yiras Hashem hi oitzarai. The HaKadosh Baruch Hu's treasure house is Yiras Hashem. Chava is built up as an oitzar, because in order to have Chava, which is the Bechina of Ruach HaKodesh, in order for her to be Vayiven, which is the Bechina, going back, if you'll allow me, to go back to the previous lesson where we learned that Eshes, which is literally a reference to Chava, right, who is the first wife, is the Bechina of Abni Sofasai Tiftach, is the Bechina of Deborah, and Rabbi Nachman revealed over there, because that was Torah Yud, Rabbi Nachman said that Eshes is Abni Sofasai Tiftach. In the previous Torah, what was it? Avanim Shleimos Tivneh. Tivnes, Vayiven, Avanim Shleimais was a reference to the Sefer Yetzirah, which says that every letter of the Aleph Beis is a stone, but it's talking about the letters. Avanim Shleimais Tivne. Tamidei Chacham Memarabim Shalom Elam Al Tikar B'Noyech Ela B'Noyech, because they build up the world. Vayiven Hashem, HaKadosh Baruch Hu built up Chava. How did she build her up? Say Chazal Asika Oitzar. Says the Rebbe, Yiras Hashem. Yiras Hashem Hi Oitzar. Because the way to build up Chava, that the letters should be complete. They should have the Yud in each of the letters, which enables me to relate to the world in such a sense that it isn't, like we said, a wall, but it's a door, it's a portal that brings me beyond, through the Bechina of Yira, through the Bechina of Re'iyah, to be able to see the bigger picture and not to be dragged in to the Rachshtus of myopia, where a person is literally stuck in the tunnel vision of the moment, in the tunnel vision of the self, in the tunnel vision of objectivity, of objectification and subjectivity. Over here a person is able to see beyond. At the end of the day, what everything else relies on is Eselekim Yura. That's the whole thing of Yiddishkeit. That's the whole thing of life. Outside of that, everything is Hevel Afalam Kol Hevel. And it says over there, Ka'oitzer Shalchitim. She was built up like an oitzar of wheat. What's pshat wheat? Hainu ayira hu oitzar. So we say yira shemayim is the oitzar. Shabbat tali asiya v'tikun shel chita. Because over there, chita is reliant on the aspect of oitzar. What's chita? Chita is gematria 22. The 22 letters of the Aleph Beis. Chaf Beis Oisiya Shalashon HaKodesh. It was an oitzar of chita, because the oitzar, right, of oitzar of yira shemayim, of which Chava Lashon HaKodesh was built up, was an outside of the Bechina of Chita. Zabachinas Elikim Diber B'Kodshai. Elikim Diber B'Kodshai. Shedibra HaKodesh is Toile Be'Elikim. Elikim Yura. Elikim Diber B'Kodshai. When a person's connected to the Bechina of Seif Davar Kol Nishma es Elikim Yura, which is the Bechina of Yira Shamayim, the outside of Yira Shamayim, then and only then can a person live in a world of Diber B'Kodshai, where a person is not objectifying reality, but a person is engaging with it, seeing the neshama in it, seeing the person in the woman, and not just the woman's body. Seeing that there's a human here to interact with, and not just something for a person's own pleasure to use, right? But there's a human being to relate to. And that's the Bechina of Tikkun HaBris, and that's the Bechina of Tikkun HaBris HaLashon. Bris HaLashon is Mechubin Keneged Bris HaMa'ar. Says the Heilige Rebbe weiter, V'Yosef, Al Yidei Shoyle Shleimus Lashon HaKodesh, Yosef HaTzadik is associated with the Shleimus of Lashon HaKodesh. K'mashe Kasav, as the Pasuk says in Bereshis, Ki Pi HaMedaber Aleichem, you see the words that I'm speaking to you, and Chazal say he was speaking to them b'Lashon HaKodesh. Al King Siv Bai, Hanimtza Kazeh Ish, Asher Ruach Elikim Bai. Is there any human being who has the Ruach Elikim Bai? What's the Ruach Elikim? Ruach is the Bechina of Ruach Piv Kol Tzavam, is the Bechina of Ruach HaKodesh. That's Lashon HaKodesh. That's the opposite of Ruach Shtos, which is the Bechina of Ruach HaKodesh. Emeres Kain. What did Ruach HaKodesh say? Said Rashi that Ish and Isha are one to the other, and then Mikansha Nes Elehem Arais. That's the Bechina of Ruach HaKodesh. What's Elikim? Saif Davar Kol Nishma, es Elikim Yura. right? That it's Elikim Diber B'Kadshai. If I want to live in a world of Diber B'Kadshai, it's only Ach V'Rak with Elikim. Says the Rebbe, beautiful. Ruach Elikim, Hanu Tikkun Abris. This is the Tikkun Abris. V'Bechinas V'Lekama Oid Ruach Be'ish. We saw from that pasuk V'Lekama Oid Ruach Be'ish that the word Ruach is used in the context of Taivas HaMishkal, of this Taiva Yedua. V'Lekama Oid Ruach Be'ish. And Yosef Tzaddik has the Bechin of Ruach. So therefore, he has Ruach HaKodesh. Ki b'Lashon HaKodesh tali Tikkun Abris. Because through Lashon HaKodesh, Tikkun Abris is Toila on this. V'Bechinas Mikan Shenesel Lahem Arayos, like we learned, Ruach HaKodesh Emeres Kain. Ki zeh b'lo zeh iyeh sheliot. Says the Rebbe, you can't have one without the other. Hainu Tikkun Abris u'shleimus Lashon HaKodesh im tluyim zeh b'zeh. This worldview of living in a world of meaning, of living in a world where a person is saturated. It doesn't happen in one day. It's not like you learn this and it happens. This is something a person works on. Avanim shleimus tivna. It's something you build. It's something a person builds. Your Shemayim is not acquired in a minute. This is built, it's cultivated in millions of different ways. And a person needs to inundate themselves with diburim and with learning of Torah from tzaddikim that are filling a person with Yerushalayim. This is a lifetime effort, and there's ratzah and shayv, and there's ups and downs along the journey. And it's not, this is a long-term game. But eventually a person arrives at Yerushalayim. And when they arrive at Yerushalayim, they also arrive at Tikkun Abris, because these two things are tali one on the other. And that's pshat in the pasuk v'roya zoynos ya'abed hayin. A person who's constantly frequenting places of immorality and people who are immoral for immoral activities. Ya'abed hayin. Such a person will lose their wealth, and that's true on a very basic level, right? Because these things cost money, and the more that a person is involved in this, slowly but surely, and it's still true today, just because it happens to be a lot of Arayos, quote unquote, is free, on the internet, eventually people, get drawn into an addiction to such an extent where they start to pay for things because they need more novelty, right? What do you think? They're doing for free? They're trying to draw a person into a lifestyle where a person pays, for different experiences. So on a very basic level, the Yabed Hain. Don't read that the person will lose their hain, their wealth, the person will lose their throat, will lose their speech, will lose their dibur. Says the Rebbe, shehu bechinas lashon hakodesh. Because a person who's engaged in this lifestyle, and again, it's a lifestyle. I'm not talking now about a person who's stuck in behaviors. We have to separate the two mightily. They're connected in a certain sense, but each one has to be addressed in its own way. They are interconnected because I believe, like I said before, that mental health and holy, true Torah are inextricably bound one with the other. But there's a bit of a gray area, and it's person dependent and situation dependent. We're not talking about a person who's struggling in this and working on this area. He's b'chlal tikkun abris. He is b'chlal a person who's shomer abris. Sometimes he has ratzai, sometimes he has shay, but he's working on it. But the Rebbe is speaking about a person who's, this is his definition of paigim babris. A person who's given up, doesn't care, doesn't. Person who's in this inyan, ma'abed lashon hakodesh. That's going to directly detract from a person's experience of the whole world in this way. And we're seeing this. Children who grow up with inappropriate materials, because Imtinchak have a very difficult time relating in a healthy way to other women. Because their whole brain is wired in such a way that they cannot see anything beyond the objectification that they've been hardwired for, and it causes a loss of a certain sensitivity for nature, even just neurobiologically, without getting into the whole thing. I'm ashamed to speak about any of these things in Rav Jeremy's presence, but I believe that this is so, from my own, personal research and so on, that neurobiologically, super hyper realistic and hyper stimulated input from the standpoint of materials that people are watching or experiences that people are engaging in, can hijack the brain's dopamine system in such a way that normal things that are supposed to bring a person pleasure, that a person with a normal brain, they cannot get pleasure from. Yeah. So it literally, on an anatomical, I would say on a molecular, on a physical level, on a physiological level, on a very realistic, hardwire level, like you can measure it, this experience of Pigam Abris leads to a loss of Lashon HaKodesh. Hold on a second, I'm sorry. Where a person can no longer experience the sacred and really joyous nature of just being alive and experiencing non-hyper peak, just floods of dopamine in the brain, but just the way that things are supposed to be. And that requires a reset. And that's the whole thing of neuroplasticity, and takes time, etc., but it's a journey. But this is the journey that we have to go on. And we have to heal. We have to heal. And the more that we heal in this area, says the Rebbe, the more our whole Lashon HaKodesh, the way that we experience, forget. And that's why I say it's not really about tikkun abris. It's life. It's all of life. Because the whole of life is depending on our engagement with this particular issue. If we're working on this issue, and a person is getting help and getting healing, and a person is doing the thing that they need to do, and each person has their own strategy and their own avoid, then it's a whole journey for everybody. But that a person works on this, a person is going to see changes in areas that are well beyond this particular Indian. Yeah.
I don't know where I read this once, but about the Dor HaMabul, they were eventually involved with not just the riots, but bestiality and all these things. Because, and I don't remember where I heard or read this, but it started off with, call it stam riots, but they got to a point where they were just bored of
That's
that.
That's right.
And
That's
they
why I said
moved on all the way to.
That's a little bit what I was saying before.
Yeah.
Is that you get bored, like eventually a person's going to pay. Like even on a simple understanding, that's also because it's more intense and more intense and more intense, and it's mamish. Like any addiction, it's just not something that's ingested through your mouth, but it's ingested through your eyes. It's or through a person's body. It's the same thing, not your eyes, a person's eyes. Okay, it's the same nekuda. Let's just finish up to the end of the paragraph. It says the Heilige Rebbe Schos Yargan Aleinu, mamish healing our generation. It's literally healing for us, mamish. These two things rely on one another. Kimisha poigim babris ma'abel Lashon HaKodesh. V'zeu. So the pasuk says, "Kabed es Hashem ma'oincha." Honor Hashem from your wealth. It's a totally different pasuk. And Chazal darshan on this word the same thing. Al tikr me'oincha elamei migroincha. It's the same drasha. Either ya'abed hoin, or a person will get hoin. In that sense, it was loss of Lashon HaKodesh. In this sense, it's honor Hashem with Lashon HaKodesh. Kabed daika, ki by tali b'chinas kavod. And why does it say kabed in this sense? Kabed es Hashem ahoincha. Honor HaKodesh Baruch Hu with the b'chin of garain. Why? Ki by tali b'chinas kavod. Because the whole kavod of a person or the shame of a person is tali on this aspect. Ki hepach hakavod hi charpas b'zyonis. The opposite of kavod is shame. V'him talim b'mukam arayin. And all of that is all revolving around this particular area of human functionality. Kemuva b'tikunim, as it's brought in the Tikkun Zerav, lo yispoi shashu, that Adam and Chava were not wearing any clothes, but they were not ashamed. Ein boishas ela b'makam arayin. Because there was no aspect of arayis yet. Because they hadn't yet eaten from the Eitz Hadas Tov Ra. Because the Eitz Hadas Tov Ra was the tree of objectification. The Eitz Hadas Tov Ra was the tree of ego. The Eitz Hadas Tov Ra was a world in which, instead of connecting to the Eitz HaChaim with awe and awareness that this is a gift from God, they felt that they could manipulate the Eitz Hadas. So that's the nachash we're going to get to in a minute. That's the whole inyan of the Satan. Memela, their eyes opened up, and all of a sudden they realize they're embarrassed. Why are they embarrassed? Because it's a bechin of a pegama bris. And according to that Manda Amar that says that the Eitz Hadas Tov Ra was a chita. Why? Because they went ahead and they took something that could be used, Dibor, as a communication from a Kadosh Baruch Hu. Chita is the 22 letters of the Aleph base, and they turned the whole thing into Ra. As we're going to learn, because the Eitz Hadas Tov Ra had those two capacities. But they went ahead and they took the Ra of the Eitz Hadas Tov Ra. Memela, all of a sudden they realize they're not wearing clothes. All of a sudden there's shame, because all of a sudden there's an inyan of arayas, because all of a sudden a person can go ahead and take something that doesn't belong to them. And there's no greater shame than namadiki sufa. And that's the whole inyan of this inyan of pagama bris, is that a person looks for an easy dopamine hit that they didn't earn. I wish I had another hour to talk about this. I'm telling you, Chevron. Because what's the whole inyan of the dopamine hits? It's easy. A person goes on their browser, and that's it. It's you have whatever you want. What kings didn't have, 40 years, 400, however many years ago, maybe even in a sense 40 if you adjust it relatively. But what kings didn't have however many years ago, a person has in 2 seconds. They didn't earn. There's no effort. It used to be effort. A person had to date a woman. A person had to go and spend money and time and be a mensch and earn it. Because it had to be other-focused, even when it was self-focused, but there was an other. Over here, there's no other. There's no mate. This is the Bechina Pegama Bris. There's no other. There's no yichud. There's no one to be miyachid with. It's all self. The Mela, there's busha. Because it's nama de kisufa. Because the kisufin is all surrounding this, that a person doesn't work. Do you know how to go ahead and counteract the unhealthy dopamine that we're speaking about on a neurobiological level? Healthy dopamine. You know how you get healthy dopamine? By things that take effort. Working out, taking cold showers, going for a run, producing something, creating something, giving. These are healthy dopamine that a person who's going through dopamine withdrawal, so to speak, who's in this process, and there is a withdrawal period. It's a drug. It's not going to be easy. The way to counteract that is by giving your brain healthy dopamine. And every single one of the ways that a person can give themselves healthy dopamine take effort. Because it's the hepich, you hear? It's the hepich of the free dopamine. What was wrong with the free dopamine? It made me feel like garbage. Know why? Because because the main place of shame and busha is arayis, which is all a result of eating from the Eitzadas Toivara, which causes their eyes to open up and realize this in and of arayis, because they try to manipulate the world. They try to take it for themselves. You'll be like God. I'll be like God. All of a sudden, everything shifts. Nama de kisufa, and the whole world changes. So what we need now is not only the chizuk for our youth and ourselves and so on. We also need healthy alternatives. We need to allow our children to taste the joy, and not the pleasure per se of that, because it won't compete on a hyper peak level of but we'll replace it with things that give us joy. Mama's joy, long-term joy. It's all connected. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. We have 2 minutes left. I just want to make it to the end. Okay, so the Rebbe says, because the whole thing is related to the Indian of arayis. This is the aspect of the arla, which is the bechina of what they told Shechem. The arla is a cherpa for us. Cherpa. Why cherpa? Because this area of the body can either be the place of the greatest pleasure, right, in a holy way, or I would say joy, or it could be, the opposite. So therefore, kabed is Hashem ha'incha. What's ha'incha is groincha. What's groincha is the bechina of, I don't want to be crass, but that area of the body is called a groin. That was for Amram, only for Amram. Kabed is Hashem migroincha. What's the Indian? This is mehaincha. I'll take mehaincha, migroincha. It's the voice, right? Which is the bris halash and the bris hama'ar, because these two things are mechuven one with the other. So memela kabed is the opposite of busha. That instead of that place being a place of shame and busha, turn it into a place of kavod. Give a person self-respect, that a person should live with dignity, that a person shouldn't live with shame and hiding and deleting browser history and all this garbage. A person should mamish live upfront and real and strong and proud, like all of us want to live. Kabed, with kavod. Shu hepech shel cherpas u'bizyonos. Not to live in a sense of nama de kisufa, taking that which we didn't earn and feeling terrible about it. That it's all talay in our wealth, but it's not the wealth, it's in the garin, it's in the words. Says the Rebbe, beautiful. Why is Yosef called what Yosef's called? Because Yosef is taken a bris, and Yosef is a person as ruach halikim. V'shemi Yosef al shem shleimus lashon hakodesh who taken a bris. Yosef had lashon hakodesh. Yosef had taken a bris, but b'chinas asaf elikim es cherpasi. Yosef is called Yosef because Rachel said, now HaKadosh Baruch Hu has gathered in my shame. My shame. What's the Indian of Yosef in shame? Because Yosef is tikkun abris. The opposite of tikkun abris is Pagam abris. Pagam abris is the place of shame. Yosef is tikkun abris. Asaf elikim es charpasi. Ki boy tali kavod, because upon that is kavod, which is the opposite of shame. Kabed es Hashem yahaincha, kabed es Hashem yahaincha, ki im boishes elu b'mekayim Aryeh Niskala, because the ikar busha comes through Aryeh. We'll close for here, even though, imagine when Rabbi Nachman gave this over, he didn't give it over in Chalakim. They sat for 8 hours, and the Rebbe revealed the Torah. Imagine how they felt. Rabbi Nachman says they were in Gan Eden Elyon. Can you imagine being there? This is printed in a sefer. Can you imagine sitting there when this Torah is channeled into the world for the first time? I mean, honestly, who could bear it? All right, Tikkun Lel. All right, because it was Shavuos. Hashem Shemamish bless us, not just to learn it, but to be mekayim it, l'uvdel l'maisa for all of us. It's a difficult journey. It's the reason we're here. And each and every one of us, B'ezras Hashem, should continue to take steps in the right direction. We should be able to live with Yiras Shamayim. We should be able to live with a sense of kavod. We should be able to live with a sense of tikkun and Ruach HaKodesh, through our Lashon HaKodesh, and the way that we engage with the world with the eyes of a Jew. B'ezras Hashem. Thank you so much for joining us.
Kavod is...
אני הבן ואתה האב שלי שכל כך אוהב אותי האב שלי מלך חי וקיים על כל נשימה שאני